Let's see what the Capcom Localization team has to say. Brought to you by Ref Says This. Video called Localizers proudly confirm woke agenda, quote unquote, fixing Japanese media.
What's up, guys? We're here. So today we have another round of localizer-related drama to cover. More issues stemming from the localization of Japanese media into the Western markets, because this is an issue that reflects on the localizers who are abusing their position of trust to add in a bunch of nonsense into their translations. Now, we've seen Capcom's localization team throw their hat in the ring yesterday. So for absolutely no reason at all, they have made this very long thread with the goal of sharing what localization is and some of these subtle nuances of providing a localization. Now, of course, in their games, we've seen some issues with localizations into Western markets. So this thread and some of the information contained within it has confirmed a lot of the fears and concerns customers have had about the localization of these Japanese games into Western markets. Now, of course, if you have been concerned about the shoddy localization of anime and manga, you should also be concerned with these shoddy localizations of Japanese video games and Japanese media in general, because these issues are all
You might as well learn Japanese, so that's where I'm at. Hello.
Intertwined. So here we have the start of the thread. They begin by describing what is localization. Embark on a global adventure through the lens of game localization beyond mere translation. We're diving into the art of cultural adaptation, preserving context, and inclusive storytelling. Join us as we unravel the intricacies that make games resonate worldwide.
You know, it's complicated because there are all kinds of stylistic choices. I mean, what is it with the watch warmly? Like, you ever heard of Toho? Or it's like the dude who make the Toho, he keep telling people to watch warmly, right? I mean, what is that supposed to mean? Well, I mean, I like it personally, but
Wow, that was beautiful to read. Unfortunately, a lot of localizers operate on a much more simple level where they just work to inject whatever they want into their stories and see how much they can actually get away with. But continuing on into the thread, it says, not just translating. Localization isn't just about translating words. It's about adapting the game for a global audience. Remember this phrase, global audience. We'll talk more about that.
It's not actually for a global audience. No language is like global language, right? I mean,
in a second. Think of cultural nuances, idioms, and the regional flair. A good localization makes players feel right at home wherever in the world they are. So right here, this thinking of the cultural nuances and how we have to change things. God forbid anyone...
I'm all for adding regional flair to your game based on the translation you do. Hello? But like, how do you get the global audience in there? I don't understand. Like...
would be exposed to Japanese culture. Am I right, localizers? It's such a weird thing where they're so obsessed with trying to change and alter anything that resembles Japanese culture. It's a very strange process, but let's focus on this last line. A good localization makes players feel right at home.
What kind of localization explicitly aims to make people who don't know English feel at home in the English localization? This is so confusing.
Guys, I don't know about you, but I don't really care for this. I don't want to feel at home when I'm reading or consuming Japanese media. That's kind of the whole point.
When the girl says Oni-chan, it's like, are you gonna leave it as Oni-chan, or are you gonna be like, oh big bro, right? It's just like, you can actually create a localization around new words.
Of me going to a different medium that's a different language and culture. It's something different. I don't want to feel at home, whether it's watching anime or reading manga or playing Japanese video games. Like, what now, Capcom? Like
maybe you just feel at home already, like with different cultures in your media, because that's how the world works in a way if it's done well. So I think doing a good job at what they do.
What are you going to do to make me feel at home as an American?
That's the question.
Like, if you have a samurai character, are you going to change him into a cowboy so I feel nice and home, at home? Like, it's just all kind of ridiculous.
How samurai's not the most American thing ever. Hello? What are you talking about?
But continuing on, we get another very important section here saying the importance of context. Lost in translation?
Don't they have like all these samurai movies in America? Come on, like for real.
Nah, preserving the vibe is key. Jokes, references, and even gameplay elements might need a little cultural remix. That's a new one, a cultural remix. That's a really funny way of saying cultural vandalism, as these localizers are inclined to do, but they go on to...
It's not like Japan isn't doing cultural vandalism all the time themselves, and it's a good thing. It's part of having a conversation with the culture, you know what I mean?
Say, it's important to find that sweet spot to make sure players get the intended experience without feeling like something got lost in the process. So we've seen this global audience reference in the previous section, and then in here we get this cultural remix in this sweet spot. Now, unfortunately for Capcom, I don't think they really know what the sweet spot is, because if you go to their website, they talk about their goals of localization. Right here, they say Capcom's localization team is involved in game development from the initial stages, and simply translating games developed under Japanese norms can end up hurting users unexpectedly due to historic, religious, or cultural differences. So basically right here, that sweet spot is really far in one direction, where they're basically saying the localization team needs to be involved right at development, or if they're not, these Japanese norms that are in the game might hurt people in other audiences. But then, on the same
You do risk hurting the integrity of the product with this.
website, here's another section talking about delivering made in Japan to countries with different languages and cultures, where they say, while localization is an important part of overseas game development, we should avoid trying to completely localize a game. Capcom is a Japanese company, and attempting to make a 100% Western game will only result in creating an imitation of a Western game, which is something I would imagine players and customers would like to hear, but that's a departure from what we just read. Between these two statements and the thread we're reading on Twitter, we have
Like, in the end, you will have somewhat clownish, respinnings of not just the Japanese culture here and there, but also of all kinds of other culture. Everyone, all the time, has a clownish view of something, And so by having a conversation, by being willed to be the fool, well, maybe Capcom could do the greatest work by having silly takes on other cultures that they are not Japanese, maybe. But so, I'd like to see some examples. So what is Capcom doing here? Do they have like a silly cowboy character here to add to the samurai or whatever, Just add a silly cowboy. I mean, it would be lovely, wouldn't it be?
3 different conflicting statements on what their goal is with their localizations. Some are very extreme, some are more nuanced, some are in the middle. It's very confusing. But moving on, let's read this bridging the linguistic gap. Each language has its unique structure and cultural context. Our teams work to ensure the narrative and dialogue maintain coherence and emotional impact. It's not just about words, it's about capturing the essence of the story in a way that resonates with the target audience. Now, here's the issue. A lot of this is basically saying that we need
It's saying a whole lot of nothing, but there's a point there.
to restructure things in order to allow these Western consumers to understand what's
I'm just saying, watch warmly, good sir. Please watch warmly.
happening and to consume it properly. However, a lot of customers and a lot of people from the West, they want something very simple. A very honest translation, as close to the original intent as possible in any context. They want it as close to the original message as utterly possible. And here's the thing, sometimes things get difficult. Sometimes there are Japanese phrases and terms that really have no equivalent in other languages like English. However, that doesn't mean you should have to restructure them. Just leave that phrase in and then do something that for some reason localizers are terrified of, and that's providing a translator's note. When you see some phrase, term, holiday, what have you, that is something that is really Japanese and maybe people from other languages wouldn't understand, keep that original phrase and then add a translator's note and let people understand and learn what this different thing is, instead of
It's not like it's rude to want your audience to adopt new vocabulary, right? I mean, that's what this ultimately comes down to. And yeah, the woke people, or whatever that's supposed to mean, they do that too. But so, maybe the gamer should do it too. It's about the language. Are you entitled to change the language, add things to the language, and the cultural imagination? Of course you are. So, but now, what Capcom is doing here is they seem to want to play it safe. They don't want to confront their audience with things that aren't in the dictionary. Ooh. Little do they know that the dictionary is not sufficient to fully capture what a word means in general. And so typically I want people to give their own definitions, because we probably operate under different definitions. And so the foundation of having a conversation is that we figure out what our terms mean, instead of being pedantic about, oh, but the dictionary says this. Dictionary says this because my whole philosophy is based on getting the most definitive definitions anyway. So if people disagree with me, I can just refer them to the dictionary. It's like, no.
censoring.
And yeah, I've seen somebody argue on this level, and it was not a very savory person. But there's probably more people like that in all kinds of directions of the spectrum of thought. But anyway, I'm just saying, words, like 4 or 5 words that people are having some relationship with, and sometimes they will want to push the envelope, and it's fair to hear them out for a minute as to what a word means anyway. And it doesn't, you don't lose unless It's the framing game, right? Like, so you want to have a new word. You want to have a word nobody knows about for a thing that people have a negative opinion of, right? The trap you can fall into on both sides. Like, you can also fall into the trap when you use new words, right? You can get the wrong idea by using the wrong, well, like the new word for something. But so it's not a big problem in a way if you're just willed to have a good faith conversation on the basis of having explained the word and you're talking to somebody who actually understands anything at all. So, and it may not be a big deal, right? It's not like every new word is hiding something terrifying, and so it must be purged. And again, this is why we have this conversation. It's about, okay, so potentially new concepts or new combination of concepts. What kind of new landscape do you want to endow the viewer with? It's a present. It's a gift. New way to look at the world, at the world in words. Oh yeah.
Or altering or trying to make it into something else. Let people learn about a different culture. Is that so scary to these translators and localizers? Literally, allow people to learn things through translators' notes. I think they're excellent. I like to learn about certain things through notes like that. I think it's very helpful. And for some reason, localizers are...
It's not like also an inconvenience at times, right? Like if I just want to watch some comfy show, it's like, okay, why is there 5 translators notes in this thing and they're all rather extensive? I don't know.
Petrified of using this very valuable tool in their translations. But moving forward, oh, you knew you would see sections like this. Cultural sensitivity in characters. Character design and development must be culturally sensitive. No. What may be acceptable in one culture might be offensive in another. Too bad. Localizers play a crucial role in ensuring that characters are relatable and respectful, avoiding stereotypes or other references that could be perceived as negative in specific cultures.
Bad things are bad, but this is always like one of those low-level concerns in a way. You don't want to do bad things just for the heck of it, but you are going to do a whole lot of bad things that people think are bad, right, in the process of doing something good. So you got to get the hierarchy of values right here. So as it's a worrying bullet point we got here.
Skill issue. Basically, I don't understand bending over backwards to basically appease a bunch of weirdos on Twitter who are never going to consume your products in the first place.
Don't do that.
So this idea right here of designs and development must be culturally sensitive. Culturally sensitive to who? Well, probably to very sensitive people. That's the issue. Because then we end up with situations like this where we...
Yeah, I'm worrying about this use of the word must. It must be. Yeah, it actually doesn't have to be. You know, it probably shouldn't be all the time. Sometimes you gotta be insensitive to a whole lot of people to make a good product, to make a culturally progressive product, in fact. So,
Getting heavy censorship of anything that looks like fan service. Forget fan service. That is definitely way too offensive for a lot of the people that they're trying to appease in the Western market. And it's something that gamers are fed up with. They're tired of this process of over-the-top censorship of anything that looks like an attractive character design or fan service. And we also have seen the lengths at which localizers will project their own belief systems into their localizations. Only a few weeks ago, we covered this big situation coming out of the lovely complex English dub, where basically there was this whole disaster where the localizer in charge of it openly admitted that he doesn't like the anime he was working on. He said that it was bad and had a lot of problematic themes and characters, and it was his job to basically save it. So he changed it.
And doesn't this offend and hurt a lot of people too? So it's one of these classic do as I say, not as I do moments, right? But so people are generally already not offending each other in needless and reckless ways all the time anyway, outside of certain circles, I guess. I don't know, anyway.
A great deal of the characters, the dialogue, the story, what have you. Even removing a self-insert from the original creator of the series because they didn't find it appropriate. Absolutely insane narcissistic stuff, but that's what's going on. So that person is the arbiter of what is appropriate for these markets.
But again, so one way or another, it is a low priority. You can insult your core audience. You may not get success with that, obviously, so maybe you want to reconsider, but anyway. Somebody's probably going to pay for your stuff anyway, because, well, if people are busy fighting with each other, well, they aren't going to make demands of the states, which maybe they should make demands of the states, just in terms of economic things. I mean, nothing wrong with a good economic plan like Adam Smith would even get behind, you know what I mean? Anyway.
Trust these people. I don't think you should either. These localizers have their own sense of what they think is appropriate and not appropriate. And oftentimes, those views are greatly different than the potential customers of these games. And that's the problem here. So we're supposed to sit back and just trust these localizers to understand the nuances of these differing cultural values when really nobody wants them to be doing that. If localizers just went poof, right? in these mediums, I don't think people would even notice. In fact, things would probably get better, but
True.
nobody is dying for localizations, okay? People want honest translations before anything else. But continuing on, we have this section about inclusive language and representation. Boy, howdy, this will be good. Localization efforts extend to promoting inclusivity through language and representation. This involves adapting not only the linguistic aspects, but also addressing gender-specific language, cultural norms, and diverse perspectives. The aim is to create an immersive experience where players from different backgrounds can identify with the characters and narrative.
Immersive experience where players from different backgrounds can identify with the characters and narrative. I feel like this is just missing the basic sophistication that any big text that shaped history has. Like, you know, those big books of history, yeah, that is known as religious texts, and you got these all over the place. I'm not here to hold up one religion over another. As long as it has been around for a long ass time, it probably has a lot of characters and narratives that people can identify with, right? So you don't just get to grab this out of nothing, out of like, oh, we have real people here, and so we tell their story. No, you're gonna go to the big text of history, and then you find characters and narratives that people can identify with, right? And so, of course, you can have fluff, like how the character visually represents, sure. And you better make them pretty, because people don't enjoy playing characters that aren't pretty, obviously, and there are studies on this, so even if people say something else, but they rather play characters that are pretty, so I don't blame them for it, obviously. Like, what's the problem? In the first place, you wanna play a character who has a personality that is more aspirational than real, right? I mean, at least that's a tendency.
This can be very challenging for certain languages due to grammar. Again, similar to one of the first sections we read, I don't need to relate.
I don't see how this has anything to do with grammar, by the way. How is this what?
Or identify with characters. Personally, I just like the character. You know, the ultimate example people give is Goku from Dragon Ball, okay? People from cultures all around the world love Goku, despite the fact many of them look completely different than what Goku does. But it doesn't matter because they like his character. They relate to the character, not the identity.
And by the way, there's many aspirational directions you can take with a character, right? So
identity of the character, and this has been a very big issue. And also similar to this last section we just talked about, when it comes to inclusive roles and representation, that is in the eyes of the localizers, not what the customers actually want. Because when
most likely, yeah,
there is very valid forms of representation, we've seen disasters. So we had this manga series, if you remember, there was a big controversy where the main character, who is a cross-dressing male character, was rewritten by localizers to be a trans character because they believed that was a more fair and meaningful representation of this character, which was absolutely ridiculous and eventually would result in these chapters being recalled and fixed. And it's
yeah, I think it's a problem to make people believe that just because they're a fanboy or just because they're a tomboy, they have to be the other gender. I think that's I've heard people try to make that into a cultural meme, and it's like, no, not like this. People actually tend to turn out pretty happy being a fanboy or a tomboy with their original gender, and maybe they're gay, okay, like, but they're happy with it. Like, so what do you want? It doesn't mean people who are trans don't get to be trans, but don't think that just because somebody's a fanboy or a tomboy, they are like the opposite gender. No, like, you gotta live with those contradictions. Like, sometimes people like the opposite sex. It is what it is. And also representing as more of the other sex, but also still being their own sex, right? I mean, or gender, or whatever you want to call it.
Unbelievable, because there are people like Katrina and these other people who were working with 7Cs, you know, saying, oh, I guess a gay cross-dressing male character is not diverse enough. We have to go to the next step and make this character trans. It's very weird. You are denying the identity of a gay cross-dressing character, and apparently that's just not enough representation. And people who were actually enjoying this character and what he represented were upset about this because people in the localization scene wanted to virtue signal and get some brownie points on Twitter by rewriting this character to be trans. It was absolutely disgusting stuff, by the way. But continuing on, here's some other examples people have been picking up from the addressing gender-specific language, where we have examples like here saying, just stand tall, you're a boy, aren't you? To be translated into, just take a few deep breaths. And even notice they changed the name of the dog, dude. They changed it from Bochi to Rover. Is that necessary? Is that really valuable? Is that adding something to this translation? I don't think so. But anyways, moving on to the next section. Adapting humor and wit. Oh boy. Humor often relies on cultural references and wordplay, making it a challenging aspect of game localization. Translators must carefully navigate puns, jokes, and cultural references to maintain the intended comedic effect.
As the joke is just somebody keeps saying precious things and gets called out for it, with some self-awareness on both sides. Right? It's like, anyway, sometimes jokes aren't actually that hard to translate. So let's see what's going on here.
This requires a deep understanding of the target audience's sense of humor while staying true to the original wit. Yes, the target audience's sense of humor. Unfortunately for places like Capcom and their localization team, they have the wrong target in mind. They're not targeting customers, they are targeting a bunch of spurgs on Twitter who want Gen Z humor and goofy chungus-wungus language in their localizations. I mean, this is what we end up with. You have the honest translator versus the...
Now I'm wondering, should I call out that he's using ableist language, or... I don't know. People are free to use ableist language, right? It's not great, but, I mean, you can do what you want, right? So, sorry to all the people with Asperger's who feel offended by the fact that Twitter actually has some serious tendencies to appear rather like on the spectrum, even though, of course, it's just an amalgamation.
Localizer, and the localizer adding in things like incel and weeb and sus and all these things, where it often seems like, one, they're forcing in this Gen Z language, but they're...
And by the way, it's obviously more convenient for a medical system to put a label on you than actually deal with your real, full range of life. Like, your whole life is what formed you in a way, right? And so the medical system clearly doesn't have time for that, so...
They're also doing these weird translations where they're now seemingly insulting the viewer. And
as much as a diagnosis can help, of course. Paths open up when you have a diagnosis, sure, but also some paths become closed down, so to speak, unless you fight for them.
The consumer, which is always odd, and it makes sense when we think about some of the localizers we've talked about who seemingly hate the medium and hate the customers of the medium that they're working in.
There is ableist language that is plainly hurtful and not pointing at something real, and yeah, so you should avoid that for sure. Of course.
So it's not surprising that they take liberty with their localizations to insult the customer. It happens all the time where they're calling the customer through inaccurate translations things like incel, pedophile, weeb, all these things. It's very, very weird. But moving on, this is the last section right here. Consistency in terminology. Maintaining consistency in terminology is crucial for a smooth and coherent gaming experience. This applies not only to translating words, but also to ensuring that game mechanics, instructions, and lore are consistently represented across languages. Establishing a cohesive language system helps prevent confusion and enhances the overall gaming experience for players worldwide. Now, I think this is very contradictory to a lot of things they've been saying in this thread, because if you want consistency in terminology, you can't really have that when you're changing your translations based on the cultural sensitivities of where that particular localization is going. So if a certain phrase, term, story, character, whatever, is offensive to one country but not the other, you're going to end up with inconsistencies within those stories. And that goes against everything they're trying to say right here. But moving on, this is
That's a good point there, in terms of you don't want to switch how you translate one thing inside of this one anime all the time, right? Like, so there's some baseline consistency. It's kind of a minor point.
good part of all this. People are crapping all over this thread. I have no idea why they wasted their time on this. And you can see this is when things are getting good. When the original post is getting roasted in multiple languages. That's when you know you really messed up on Twitter. You can see some of the replies here. I'll read a few of them. This one saying, why do you think other people can't handle cultures or go look up nuanced words, phrases, customs, and foods? Why do you think others can't handle something different? That's something we touched upon earlier in the video. What is so damaging and concerning and problematic about Japanese culture? It's very weird. These localizers are quite odd in the message that they're trying to send to their potential customers. Here's another one saying, make your game for the non-existent modern audience and you'll receive their non-existent money.
And everyone's modern already, so...
There's very likely going to come a time in the near future even when you wish you would have deleted this post quickly. Way too...
Like, when did modernity start? Like, 500 years ago? I don't know. Like, when we got out of the Dark Ages? I don't know. I think we're pretty modern here. At the bedrock of it, we are living in modern society pretty much everywhere anyway, and changing that, like, almost nobody is trying to do that besides extreme fringes.
Too late now. It's so easy not to play your games. I mean, yeah, they're doing everything in their power to make you not want to play their games. They're making it too easy. Here's another round saying, I will never buy another Capcom game as long as this woke mission statement is how Capcom USA does business. Shame. OG Mega Man /X is one of my favorite all time. Crapcom is back to their crappy ways. Enjoy bankruptcy because I ain't coming back. Stop destroying games with this garbage. AAA companies will not learn until they are close to failing financially. People just want translation, not localization. Just use AI. They don't have bias if programmed in at the outset. So a lot of people are fighting.
The bias would be, at the very least, the bias would be in service of a good localization, quote unquote, in terms of making things sound exactly right in terms of what people are expecting to hear. And yeah, sure, they might translate this Japanese dish word by word, like they might just take the Japanese name of the dish, but then ultimately you have a rather culturally centered translation coming from AI. Just because the sample set you use as reference for the AI to refer to is all the English stuff that people are saying, right?
Back against this and saying they have an issue with this. And ultimately, like what they said down here, these companies just will not learn. And it's strange because we know these are companies trying to make a profit. They're doing everything in their power to try to min-max their revenue. And yet they're doing stuff like this that is backfiring. We're seeing it with the releases of recent AAA titles like Suicide Squad, Kill the Justice League, using the kind of things that people hate, live service, transactions in game, things like that. And people
don't care about live service and microtransactions. Just make a good game.
Are upset about it, and the sales are reflecting it's a huge bomb. And yet we've seen companies look at that and say, well, you know what, we're still going to go with it. It makes no sense. And with these localizations, the same thing is happening. These localizations are causing people to abandon products and companies, and they just keep doing it. Who is telling and gaslighting these people into thinking these localization efforts are good for them? And overall, I can't imagine the amount of money that Capcom is wasting on initiatives like this. It's a complete waste of time, and they're still doing it. And
hey, they might get paid one way or another. You know what I mean? Or at the very least, they don't have to worry about getting cancelled by some people. I think it's a good thing that they can get cancelled by other people, if they're gonna potentially compromise the quality of their product in such a way.
The fact that they posted this onto social media is mind-boggling. Keep this on your website. This seems like something that you would, sneak on your website to make some of the investors.
And see, this is sadly the only language that these companies, political parties, governments, etc. speak. It's the language of fear. You gotta make them fear losing votes, losing money, losing popular standing. This is how you have to engage with these, sadly. Because for humans, for people, fear is one of the least effective ways to communicate. If you try to control somebody by fear, they will just forever have questions as to the validity of what you have to say. And at some point, maybe there won't be enough fear going around to keep them under the boot, so to speak. So fear, not so good when it comes to people. But fear, one of the few things that work for companies and so on. So it's a bit of a contradiction there, but not really, because companies clearly aren't people. Companies are not moral actors, neither states or political parties.
Happy, or the ESG, whatever you want. But to put this on Twitter, knowing the kind of perspective people have on these localizations, totally tone deaf. If I were the actual people at Capcom in Japan, I would be furious that they made this post, or convinced you that this post was a good idea, because it reflects horribly, not just on this localization team, but on Capcom as a whole and all the products that they are attempting to sell to these potential.
Yeah, they should have stick to the core principles of what a localization is, and not throw in like all these buzzwords. It's a bad look.
Customers that might be lost. But anyways, that's going to do it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. It was a little bit of a long one, so
I did appreciate. Hope you enjoyed it as well. We'll link the vid below. Do leave him a like if you enjoyed what you heard, and so on. Rate, comment, subscribe, share. Do at least think about, would you want to share this video? That's going to inform your stance on if it's actually a video that got you something in your life. And, it's important to get ahead in your own life too, right? Do you want to come back for more? Well, I hope you do. And so on that note, I only want the best for you. Hope to see you around. Stay safe out there.